How much do we really know about the private conversations within the royal family? Princess Diana was known for using handwritten letters to express her deepest thoughts. Some revealed her struggles, while others hinted at tensions behind palace walls. But one letter, rumored to be linked to Prince Edward, remains a mystery. What role did Edward play in Diana's world? Could their individual experiences within the monarchy reveal a hidden perspective on royal life? And how did their paths reflect the monarchy's struggle to adapt to change? Let's dive in. Unlike Prince Charles, who was the heir to the throne, or Princess Anne, who had firmly established herself as one of the hardest-working royals, Prince Edward's role within the monarchy was less defined. As the youngest child of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, he was expected to follow a traditional royal path, but his interests and career choices took him in a different direction. While he initially pursued a military career, his eventual withdrawal from the Royal Marines in the early 1990s led to public criticism and questions about his place within the royal family. This was a time of significant change for the monarchy, with multiple high-profile scandals dominating headlines and raising doubts about the institution's stability. Diana, who had spent years navigating the pressures of royal life, was no stranger to the intense scrutiny Edward faced. By the early 1990s, she had experienced the full force of media attention, particularly as her marriage to Prince Charles continued to deteriorate. She had spoken openly about the challenges she faced, from feeling isolated within the palace to struggling with her mental health. Her ability to express herself through writing became an outlet for her emotions, a way for her to communicate thoughts that she may not have been able to voice in person. Many of her known letters reflected her deep concern for those around her, whether they were members of the public, charity workers, or individuals within the royal household. Although there is no confirmed record of Diana writing to Prince Edward, it is not unreasonable to consider the possibility, given her well-documented habit of writing personal messages. If such a letter ever existed, it may have been written during a period of significant upheaval for the royal family. The year 1992, which Queen Elizabeth later described as her annus horribilis, was a particularly difficult time. It was marked by the official separation of Diana and Charles, the divorce of Princess Anne, a fire at Windsor Castle, and growing tensions within the monarchy. Edward, like many in the family, had to navigate these challenges while also trying to establish his own identity within the institution. During this period, Edward was beginning to explore his interests outside of traditional royal duties. While his older siblings had more defined paths, Charles as the future king, Anne as a dedicated working royal, and Andrew with his military career, Edward took a different approach. He developed an interest in the arts and media, eventually forming his own television production company. This unconventional career move set him apart from the rest of the family and raised questions about his future role within the monarchy. The transition was not without difficulties, and public reception to his ventures was mixed. Diana, who had also challenged royal traditions in her own way, may have recognized the challenges Edward faced in carving out his own path. She had long been known for her ability to connect with people on a personal level, offering words of encouragement and support when she sensed someone was struggling. Throughout her time as Princess of Wales, she formed close bonds with individuals who, like her, had found themselves navigating the rigid structures of the royal institution. Her letters to friends and staff members often contained words of reassurance, understanding, and at times, subtle advice on how to cope with the unique pressures of royal life. While there is no documented letter from Diana to Edward, the speculation surrounding such a possibility highlights a larger theme: Diana's role as a communicator. Her ability to express herself through writing was one of her most powerful tools, allowing her to share her thoughts in a way that felt deeply personal. Many of her letters that have been made public reveal a woman who was thoughtful, reflective, and deeply aware of the impact of her words. Whether she was writing to thank someone for a kind gesture, to express frustration over a difficult situation, or to share a moment of vulnerability, her letters always carried a sense of authenticity. Edward, despite maintaining a relatively low profile compared to his siblings, was still a key figure within the royal family. His relationship with Diana was not widely documented, but as members of the same institution, they would have shared common experiences. Whether or not Diana ever wrote to him, the idea of such a letter offers insight into the broader complexities of the royal family during that time. It was an era of transition, one in which long-standing traditions were being questioned. public scrutiny was at an all-time high, and individual members of the royal family were struggling to adapt to a rapidly changing world. As Diana continued to redefine what it meant to be a modern royal, she also faced increasing challenges in maintaining her own sense of self. Her letters, which remain one of the most personal aspects of her legacy, serve as reminders of the woman behind the public persona. They show her as someone who was deeply invested in the well-being of those around her, whether they were members of the public or part of the royal household. The speculation about whether she ever wrote to Edward is less about the letter itself and more about the kind of person Diana was, someone who sought to communicate, to connect, and to leave a lasting impact through her words. The fascination with Diana's letters continues to this day, as new pieces of her written legacy emerge over time. Some of her most famous letters have been auctioned, revealing her candid thoughts on everything from her divorce to her personal struggles with royal life. Each letter provides a deeper understanding of who she was, beyond the image the public saw. Her ability to convey emotion through her words remains one of the reasons she is still remembered so vividly. Edward, like the rest of the royal family, had to navigate the aftermath of Diana's passing and the lasting impact she left behind. The monarchy continued to evolve in response to the challenges that had surfaced during Diana's time as a royal. Her influence, particularly in terms of how the royal family engaged with the public, reshaped expectations for future generations. The changes seen in the way Prince William and Prince Harry approach their roles today can be traced back to the shifts that began during Diana's lifetime. While there may never be a definitive answer as to whether Diana wrote to Edward, what remains clear is that her words, whether spoken or written, continue to resonate. Her letters, her speeches, and even the unconfirmed stories about her correspondence serve as reminders of her enduring presence in the world's memory. The possibility of a letter to Edward is just one of many questions that remain about Diana's private thoughts and communications, but it speaks to a larger truth. Her voice was one that could never be silenced. To fully understand the significance of Diana's letters, it is important to look at the context in which they were written. The early 1990s were a time of immense pressure for the royal family, and Diana, at the center of it all, was finding new ways to express herself. Whether through public statements, interviews, or personal messages, she was shaping a narrative that extended beyond the confines of the palace walls. The way she used her words, whether to comfort, to challenge, or to reveal, became a defining part of her legacy. The impact of Diana's communication style is still evident today, not just in the way the monarchy interacts with the public, but also in the way people remember her. Her letters remain some of the most personal artifacts of her life, giving insight into her emotions, her struggles, and her deep desire to make a difference. The ongoing curiosity about whether she ever wrote to Edward is part of a larger effort to understand the full scope of her influence. Her ability to connect through writing ensured that even decades later, her words still hold power. As more of Diana's letters continue to emerge, the fascination with her private thoughts only grows. What she wrote, who she wrote to, and the emotions behind her words continue to be analyzed, offering a deeper understanding of the woman behind the crown. Whether a letter to Edward exists or not, the essence of what Diana stood for remains unchanged. A woman who used her voice in ways that transcended royal protocol and left a lasting mark on the world. As the early 1990s unfolded, the British royal family found itself at the center of unprecedented public scrutiny. The monarchy was undergoing one of its most turbulent periods, with multiple divorces, scandals, and internal conflicts dominating the headlines. It was within this challenging environment that Princess Diana found herself increasingly isolated, not only from her husband, but from the institution she had once tried so hard to embrace. Her struggles were no longer hidden behind palace walls. Every aspect of her life was being dissected by the press, making her one of the most photographed and scrutinized women in the world. Prince Edward, in contrast, was experiencing his own challenges, though with far less media attention. As the youngest child of Queen Elizabeth II, he had always been in a unique position within the royal family. Unlike Charles, who bore the weight of his future kingship, or Anne, who had carved out a reputation for her relentless work ethic, Edward had fewer expectations placed upon him. However, this did not mean he was free from pressure. He had briefly pursued a military career, following a path that seemed fitting for a royal, only to step away from it before completing his training. His decision to leave the Royal Marines was met with public criticism, raising questions about his role within the family and whether he would find a meaningful place in the monarchy. Diana understood what it was like to face relentless judgment. While she was adored by the public, her private struggles were immense. She had spoken candidly about her battles with bulimia, depression, and the emotional toll of her failing marriage. By the time she and Charles officially separated in 1992, she had already endured years of personal hardship. The year was a turning point, not only for Diana but for the royal family as a whole. Queen Elizabeth famously referred to it as her annus horribilis, or horrible year, reflecting the many crises that had unfolded, including the breakdown of her children's marriages and a devastating fire at Windsor Castle. The institution was being tested like never before, and Diana, no longer bound by the traditional constraints of her role, was beginning to express herself more openly. Throughout this period, Diana continued to communicate through letters, a habit she had maintained since her early days as a royal. Many of these letters would later emerge, revealing her thoughts on everything from her marriage to her views on the monarchy. Some were deeply personal, while others reflected her concerns about the way the royal family operated. Her correspondence with close friends and confidants showed her growing frustration with the lack of emotional support within the institution. In her letters, she often conveyed her desire for a more modern, compassionate monarchy, one that could better connect with the people it served. At the same time, Edward was facing a moment of transition in his own life. With military service no longer an option, he turned his attention to media and entertainment, a move that set him apart from his siblings. He developed an interest in television production and eventually founded his own company, Ardent Productions. This was an unusual step for a royal, and it drew mixed reactions from both the public and the press. While some saw it as a progressive decision, others questioned whether it was appropriate for a member of the royal family to engage in commercial ventures. His career in media would later face scrutiny, particularly due to its financial struggles, but at the time, it was a significant departure from traditional royal duties. Diana's own approach to public life had already broken many norms. She had transformed the role of a royal by engaging directly with people in ways that felt personal and authentic. Her famous visit to an AIDS hospital where she shook hands with patients without gloves challenged widespread misconceptions and changed perceptions about the disease. She had also been vocal about her humanitarian efforts, working tirelessly to bring attention to causes that were often overlooked by the rest of the royal family. Her ability to connect with people, both through her actions and her words, made her one of the most influential figures of her time. Edward's choice to pursue media, while different in nature, also reflected a desire to step beyond the rigid expectations of royal life. Whether Diana and Edward ever discussed these shared experiences is unknown, but what is clear is that both of them found themselves at a crossroads during this time. Diana was redefining her public role following her separation from Charles, while Edward was seeking his own professional path outside of traditional royal duties. The changes occurring within the monarchy forced each member of the family to adapt in different ways, and both Diana and Edward were navigating their respective challenges in an era where the public's expectations of the royal family were rapidly shifting. As the monarchy faced mounting criticism, Diana's influence only grew stronger. She had long understood the power of public perception and had learned how to use it to her advantage. Her ability to communicate, whether through speeches, interviews, or letters, allowed her to shape her own narrative. While she had once been expected to follow royal protocol without question, she was now asserting her independence in a way that had never been seen before. The changes she was making, both in her personal life and in how she carried out her public role, were setting a new precedent for the future of the royal family. Edward, though far less in the public eye, was also stepping away from expectations. His decision to focus on media rather than military or government service signaled a shift in how some members of the royal family were beginning to approach their roles. While his career in television would later face challenges, his willingness to pursue a different path reflected a broader movement within the monarchy, one that acknowledged the need for adaptation in a rapidly changing world. The question remained whether the institution as a whole could keep up with these changes, or whether resistance to modernization would continue to create tension within the royal household. Diana's evolving public presence and Edward's unconventional career choices were unfolding in parallel, both against the backdrop of a monarchy that was struggling to maintain its traditional image. The 90s marked a period of great uncertainty for the royal family, and the actions of its members were being watched more closely than ever before. As Diana continued to redefine her legacy, and Edward sought to establish his own identity within the royal framework, the ways in which they navigated their individual challenges would have lasting implications for the monarchy's future. As Diana continued to shape her own legacy in the years following her separation from Prince Charles, the monarchy faced increasing pressure to modernize. The public had become more vocal in its expectations of the royal family, with many questioning the institution's relevance in a rapidly changing world. Diana, with her unique ability to connect with ordinary people, was redefining what it meant to be a royal. Her humanitarian efforts, her advocacy for AIDS awareness and the campaign against landmines, positioned her as a figure of change, separate from the traditional image of the monarchy. Edward, meanwhile, was still in the process of finding his own place within the royal structure. His decision to establish Ardent Productions reflected his desire to step outside the strict boundaries of royal life. While other members of the family engaged in state duties and official engagements, Edward sought to build a career in television, producing documentaries and programs that often focused on historical and cultural topics. His involvement in the media world was unusual for a royal, and it drew mixed reactions from both the public and the press. Some saw it as an innovative move, while others viewed it as an attempt to capitalize on his royal status. By the mid-90s, Diana had solidified her reputation as a global humanitarian. Even as her personal struggles became widely known through her famous interview with the BBC's Panorama program in 1995, she remained committed to her charitable work. In the interview, she spoke openly about the difficulties of her marriage, her struggles with mental health, and her perception of the monarchy's resistance to change. Her willingness to speak candidly about these issues further endeared her to the public, but it also deepened tensions within the royal family. Edward's public role, by contrast, remained relatively subdued. While he continued his work in the media, he was often overshadowed by the more prominent members of the family. His company's productions, though ambitious, did not achieve significant success, and his involvement in commercial ventures was sometimes seen as conflicting with the traditional expectations of a working royal. Unlike Diana, whose influence extended far beyond the confines of the monarchy, Edward remained within the institution, balancing his personal interests with his responsibilities as the Queen's son. During this time, the royal family was undergoing one of the most significant transitions in its modern history. The dissolution of Diana and Charles's marriage marked a turning point, not only for Diana personally, but also for the institution itself. The monarchy had long operated under the assumption that its members would adhere to strict conventions, but Diana's increasing independence challenged that notion. She had demonstrated that it was possible to be a royal while maintaining a personal identity separate from the crown. As Diana's life took on a new direction, she continued to use her voice to advocate for causes close to her heart. Her work with landmine victims in particular brought global attention to an issue that had previously been overlooked. Her visits to war-torn regions, where she was photographed walking through active minefields, were powerful statements about the role she believed public figures should play in humanitarian efforts. These moments reinforced the idea that Diana was not just a former princess, she was a force for change. Edward's journey, though far less publicized, was also evolving. His attempt to forge a career outside of traditional royal duties reflected a broader shift within the monarchy, one that recognized the need for its members to engage with the modern world in different ways. While his ventures in television had mixed results, they signaled a willingness to step beyond the ceremonial aspects of royal life. The challenges he faced in defining his career mirrored the broader struggle the monarchy was experiencing in adapting to contemporary expectations. As the decade drew to a close, Diana's impact on the world remained undeniable. Even as she navigated her personal battles, she had set a new standard for what it meant to be a royal in the modern era. Her work, her words, and her willingness to challenge convention ensured that her influence would extend far beyond her lifetime. Edward, in his own way, represented another aspect of this evolution, a member of the royal family attempting to carve out a different path while still maintaining his connection to the institution. Diana's tragic passing in 1997 marked the end of an era, but it also ushered in a period of reflection for the monarchy. The response to her death, particularly the overwhelming public mourning and criticism of the royal family's initial reaction, highlighted the deep connection she had built with people around the world. The monarchy was forced to acknowledge the shifting attitudes toward its role and responsibilities, and in the years that followed, adjustments were made in response to the lessons learned from Diana's life and legacy. Edward, like the rest of the royal family, had to navigate the impact of Diana's passing and the lasting influence she had left behind. The institution was entering a new chapter, one in which the expectations of the public would play an even greater role in shaping its future. The changes Diana had initiated, whether intentional or not, had set the stage for a redefined monarchy, one that would need to adapt to survive in the modern world. The years following Diana's passing marked a period of transformation for the British royal family. The public's response to her death had been overwhelming, with millions mourning across the world. The intensity of grief was matched by criticism directed at the monarchy, particularly regarding its initial silence in the days following the tragedy. The institution, long seen as unshakable, faced pressure to change. The way Diana had connected with people in life became even more evident in death, as the world demanded that the royal family adapt to the modern era. Edward, like the rest of the royal family, had to navigate this shift. While he had always maintained a lower profile than his siblings, he too was affected by the way Diana had reshaped public expectations of the monarchy. The royal family could no longer afford to remain distant. It had to find ways to engage with the public more directly. In the years that followed, Edward transitioned away from his television ventures and focused more on royal duties, taking on responsibilities that reflected the evolving role of the monarchy. His increasing involvement in public service and charitable work aligned with the changes that had been set in motion by Diana's influence. By the early 2000s, it was clear that the royal family was adjusting to a world that had been significantly altered by Diana's legacy. Public engagements became more personal, with members of the royal family taking a greater interest in social causes. The approach Diana had championed, one that placed emotional connection and direct involvement at the forefront, was now being embraced by a younger generation of royals. Prince William and Prince Harry, having grown up watching their mother's humanitarian efforts, began to take on roles that reflected her values. They spoke openly about mental health, veterans' issues, and the challenges of royal life in a way that had not been done before. Edward's role within the family also became more defined. While his media career had not reached the level of success he had hoped for, he found a way to contribute in other areas. His focus shifted toward supporting the work of the royal family in a more traditional sense, but with an understanding that the monarchy could no longer operate exactly as it had in the past. He and his wife, Sophie, Countess of Wessex, took on an increasing number of public engagements, particularly in areas related to youth development, charities, and international relations. His work reflected a shift toward a monarchy that was more engaged with the public, a change that had been influenced in part by the expectations set by Diana. At the same time, Diana's letters, interviews, and public statements remained relevant long after her passing. Many of the issues she had raised about royal life, the emotional toll of duty, and the challenges of maintaining a public image were still discussed as the royal family continued to evolve. The monarchy had survived previous challenges, but Diana's impact had left a lasting imprint. The way she had used her voice to challenge certain aspects of royal tradition was something that could not be undone. Her letters, some of which were later auctioned, provided insight into her private thoughts, revealing a woman who had struggled within the institution, but had also been determined to use her platform to create meaningful change. Edward's journey in the years after Diana's death showed a quiet but steady adaptation to the modern role of a royal. While he was never as high profile as his older siblings, he demonstrated that members of the monarchy could balance tradition with a changing world. His increased engagement in public life reflected a growing recognition that the royal family needed to be seen as more approachable and involved. The formal barriers that once defined the institution were being re-examined. And while not every aspect of the monarchy had transformed, the changes that had taken place were undeniable. Diana's influence on the royal family extended beyond the public perception of the monarchy. The way she had approached humanitarian work, the way she had connected with people on an emotional level, and the way she had challenged outdated expectations all contributed to a shift that continued well into the next generation. The impact was particularly evident in the lives of her sons, who carried forward many of her values in their own approach to public service. They championed mental health initiatives, broke down stigma surrounding personal struggles, and engaged in humanitarian work that echoed their mother's efforts. Edward's trajectory was different from Diana's, but their experiences within the royal family reflected the broader tension between tradition and change. While Edward remained within the institution, working to modernize from within, Diana had pushed boundaries in ways that had a more immediate and dramatic effect. Her decision to speak openly about her struggles, to challenge the expectations placed upon her, and to redefine what it meant to be a royal, had left an imprint that could not be ignored. As time went on, Diana's legacy remained one of the most significant influences on the monarchy's evolution. The royal family of the 21st century was shaped in part by the challenges she had faced and the changes she had inspired. Edward's role within the family became clearer as he and his wife took on responsibilities that reinforced the monarchy's adaptation to the modern world. His journey, while less dramatic, reflected the gradual evolution that had been set in motion during Diana's lifetime. The world's fascination with Diana has never faded. Her letters, her speeches, and the way she carried herself continue to be analyzed, offering insight into the woman who reshaped the monarchy. Edward, though rarely discussed in the same context, was part of that shifting landscape. While they led different lives within the institution, both had to navigate the complexities of royal duty and personal identity. Diana's approach was groundbreaking, while Edward's was quieter, but each played a role in the ongoing transformation of the British monarchy. Decades after her passing, Diana's legacy continues to be felt in the way the royal family interacts with the public, in the charitable causes they champion, and in the way they present themselves in an ever-changing world. Edward's path may not have been as public or controversial, but it too reflected the gradual changes taking place within the institution. The royal family that exists today is one that has been shaped in many ways by the challenges and lessons of the past. The influence of those who dared to redefine what it meant to be a royal, whether through bold action or quiet perseverance, continues to guide the monarchy's future. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.